Open your Bibles to the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 24. Genesis means beginning, therefore a very good title for the first book of the Bible. And in the book of Genesis, we find there are three primary individuals who stand out, and we love to study them. And they're all part of the same family, but they're generations apart. And the first significant character is named Adam. He's the first man. And then the second significant character, several generations later, is Noah, who along with his wife and their three sons and their wives were rescued from worldwide destruction by obeying God, building an ark, entering that ark, and thus were saved from the catastrophic flood. And then several generations passed, and we have another character by the name of Abraham. And Abraham became the father of a great multitude, the father of the Israelite nation. And so today we are talking about this great man Abraham. He has gotten old, and he embarks on something that is very, very important on behalf of his son Isaac. Now, remember that this coming Wednesday is a special day on the calendar. It's that day where the romance between couples is really to blossom. And it was such a big day 21 years ago that I used that as the occasion to propose to Celicia. Thankfully, she accepted, and so we have been living happily ever after ever since. So don't forget, this coming Wednesday is a special day. They call it Valentine's Day. And it's a special day to remember your loved one, particularly your mate, be it husband or wife. Don't forget that special date. You might get in trouble if you don't remember it. But I hope you will be loving and giving all the time in your marriage. Keep the romance there. And what I want us to do this morning is examine this great chapter of the Bible as we consider a beautiful love story. A love story between two remarkable individuals who, once they came together as husband and wife, would spend all their days on earth together. It was until death do us part. And we want to see how this relationship blossomed, and we want to see how the two of them became husband and wife. Now, I ask you this question at the outset of the message this morning. Do you believe marriages are made in heaven? Well, somebody said, I believe marriages are made in heaven along with thunder and lightning, also made in heaven, right? Well, I want to tell you this morning that I do believe that marriages are made in heaven. Now, marriages, a successful marriage, doesn't just happen. Successful marriages happen because people work toward making their marriage work, and that's the four-letter word you don't ever forget. W-O-R-K. If you want a great marriage, you're going to have to work toward that end. And so you can apply the principles that you find from the Bible, which is the greatest manual on marriage that's ever been written, and understandably so because the Bible comes from the author, from the designer of the marriage relationship. But let me say this to you this morning. If you want to get married, and I trust if you're here and you're not married, some point you'll want to get married, then that preparation for such a relationship ought to begin very early in life. Long before you walk down an aisle, you should have prepared yourself to get married. I am bothered by what I often see as this problem. More planning and more time and more money spent in a wedding ceremony than the actual marriage relationship. But you know, there are a lot of individuals who celebrate on a Saturday night but find out come Monday morning it's awfully cold and it's bitter. And we don't want that to happen. Not to any of you. I would trust this morning that those who are married are seeking to even better their marriage, and those who are thinking about getting married at some point in life are preparing even now to do that. Now, what we find when we study the Bible is this, that customs change over the course of time. Wedding ceremonies have changed over time. In fact, you can go to various and sundry cultures today and you'll find that wedding ceremonies are different, and that's true throughout the world. In our class in the School of Preaching that looks into marriage and funeral celebrations, and I'm not comparing marriage and funerals here, don't misunderstand me. But when we do that in the same class, we talk about customs. And often what I ask our students who are from outside the United States is to give us a report on the customs in their particular society, in their particular environment, as to what a marriage ceremony is like and what a funeral ceremony is like. I always find it very, very interesting. So whenever you study Genesis chapter 24, you've got to understand that their culture was different. And the way that a wife was selected was much different the way a wife's selected today. Now, I think I know most young people and their feelings regarding the subject, that young people would rather take this into their own hands and say, I'll choose for myself who it is I want for a husband, who I want for a wife. And I don't want anything planned for me. Well, that's well and good. But as we will see in the message this morning, I still trust that as a Christian young man, young woman who honors his parents, you will seek out their advice and their admonition, because I'll tell you this, if parents really fulfill their responsibility, then they are interested in your happiness, they're interested in what happens to you, and they have come to at least this point in life where they know how pivotal the selection of a mate really is. So while they may not make the selection for you, you listen to them and seek their advice, because loving Christian parents are working for your benefit and also on your behalf. But we want to notice this morning from Genesis 24, a marriage that is made in heaven. It is a beautiful, beautiful love story with some timeless truths. Now, remember, Abraham is a primary character in the book of Genesis. He is a very, very wealthy man. And late in life, he and his beloved wife Sarah had a son of promise. They were very old when they had this son of promise by the name of Isaac. And by the time we get to Genesis 24, Sarah has died. Now, this couple, no doubt, has doted upon this little boy Isaac. And Abraham and Sarah realized that he was a promise fulfilled by God himself, and that he has a great future ahead of him, because God had already promised Abraham that in thee all the nations of the earth would be blessed, Genesis 12:3. And so this is a special boy. His parents, no doubt, have spoiled him, and yet at the same time, we find that Isaac is very, very respectful of his parents. Not only is Abraham submissive to the will of God, it seems that Isaac has learned from his father to be submissive to the will of God. 2 chapters before this, we find both of them on Mount Moriah, as Abraham, obeying God, was willing to offer Isaac as an offering unto God simply because God told him. And we find that Isaac did not rebel against his father, but in a picture of Christ, he submitted himself to the will of his father and was willing to die if that was God's will, if that was God's intention. And of course, the angel of God interrupted that particular offering, and Isaac lived. But together they were able to look down the stream of time and see another substitute, were they not? When Jesus would take their place. And so I find Abraham along with Isaac being great men of faith, and in fact both of them are mentioned in God's Hall of Fame of Faith, Hebrews 11. So Abraham and Sarah have loved this boy Isaac, and now Sarah is gone, and Isaac is still a single man, but we note that God's made a promise that through Isaac would Abraham raise up a great nation. And so for that to happen, Isaac needs a wife. Now there's another character in this story. His name is Eliezer. And he is the chief servant of Abraham. In fact, he's in charge of all of Abraham's properties, all of his goods. You could say that Eliezer was the CEO of Abraham and Isaac Enterprises, all right? Eliezer. And he does the bidding of his master. And Abraham says, I want you to go back to my home country. and I want you to do something for me. What's that? Do anything you want me to do, my Lord. And he says, I want you to go find a wife for Isaac. Well, maybe when he said, I'll go do anything, he didn't know what that meant. He was going to do what his master intended, but then when he said, go find a wife for Isaac, I'm not sure that Eliezer felt he was in the matchmaking business. Well, how am I going to know that this is the one God has selected? How will I know this is the one for Isaac? You just go. God's going to be with you. And I'm sending you there because I can't afford for my son, this son of promise, to marry a woman of the Canaanites. So you go back to my home people. Now Eliezer would make his way with plenty of Abraham's goods to show that he was indeed from a very wealthy man. Some of the kinsmen of these people that he would visit. And among those people he would visit, there's a man named Laban. And he seems to be the one in charge of his family. And he has a beautiful sister by the name of Rebekah. Rebekah, no doubt, was beautiful outside and inside. The Bible says she was a pure woman. And she was the one who was an answer to a prayer that Eliezer made to God. I want to find this woman. Eliezer prayed about it. And so God supplied the woman. It was Rebekah. That's who God had in mind. And Rebekah would agree that she would go with Eliezer to meet Isaac and become his wife. Now that's just a synopsis of what happens in Genesis chapter 24. What do we learn from Genesis chapter 24 that can help young people today in their preparation for marriage and likewise assist all of us in developing great marriages as we consider this very special week, this very romantic week, and a time when we're reminded of how important loved ones are to us? Well, I want to tell you that first of all, as you consider the events that transpired in Genesis 24, you will find that this marriage made in heaven was built on providence, okay? Just put that down. This marriage that was made in heaven was built on providence. Well, what is providence? Providence is God's ability to see beforehand. God's ability to see beforehand. Now, back in the early 1990s, there was a song that was very popular in an animated film that became quite popular in weddings. Somewhere out there, you know, beneath the sky, there's someone, you know, that's waiting for you, and one day you'll meet one another. And I can't remember all the lyrics to it. I just remember it was somewhere out there. It actually was a song that perturbed me when I heard it. I got tired of hearing it because I kept going to all these weddings where I was a groomsman, but I had no bride. And so I got tired of hearing that song, Somewhere Out There. They keep somewhere out there. Well, where's mine? But ultimately, I met the one who became my wife. And indeed, I think sometimes now back to the lyrics of that song and think, yes, she was out there all along. And I don't discount God's providence in bringing us together. Because I love the words in Genesis 2, when God awakened Adam from sleep, after the woman had been crafted from his side, the text says he brought the woman to the man. Now listen, don't discount that language. He brought the woman to the man. I believe God is still in that business today. That if He has one of His children who is desiring a mate, and his child is praying for that mate, and here's another over here that's praying for a mate, God can, through His providence, bring those two very special people together. And so I do not at all refrain in giving glory unto God for bringing my wife to me. Now, Abraham had learned early in life to trust in God's providence. And so it's trusting in God's providence that he would send Eliezer to seek out a wife for his son Isaac. Now, keep something in mind. When you're trusting in the providence of God, you're not running behind God and you're not running ahead of God, you're running alongside of God, okay? Now, Abraham had not always done this. There was a time very early on when God said move and he didn't move. He was running behind God, and God had to tell him again, I told you to get out from your father's house. Move, leave. And he did. There was another time when he was running ahead of God. God said that through thy seed, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. And so God had a plan. But because of a particular idea conceived in the mind of Sarah, that plan wasn't happening as quickly as possible, then Abraham and Sarah took that into their own hands, and Abraham went unto the handmaid of Sarah, Hagar, and had a child by Hagar. But God did not say the promised seed would come through Hagar. The promised seed was going to come through Sarah. Abraham and Sarah would have a child. And the world has been suffering ever since that wild one came into this world by the name of Ishmael. But it was Isaac through whom the seed promise was made. And so Abraham had gotten ahead of God. But in Genesis chapter 22, when Abraham, along with Isaac, goes to the top of Mount Moriah so that Isaac can be offered a sacrifice before God, I want to tell you something. Abraham is walking right alongside of God, isn't he? Walking right alongside with God. Now, providence is God's ability to see beforehand, and it's Abraham who trusts God and trusts His promises and trusts His providence to bring a wife to Isaac. Now, since providence has worked in his life all along, he wants providence to work in the life of his son. So look at verse 4 of Genesis 24. Abraham says to Eliezer, "Thou shalt go unto my country and to my kindred, and take a wife unto my son Isaac." Now, I don't know if Isaac was getting worried yet or not, but he was 40 years old. Okay, I was only 30. Isaac was 40. Isaac was 40, and he still was not married. If he's worried, I don't know. But I know that he was on Mount Moriah with Abraham, and along with Abraham, he could say that when it comes to what happens in life, whatever it is we need, God will provide. Now, if one is relying on God's providence, he remembers that wonderful passage in Romans 8:28, where God's promise is made clear, and that passage is one that is built on providence. All things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to His purpose. Now, if you believe that verse, and I'm sure you do as a Christian, you believe that verse, then why not apply it likewise that God will provide for the marriage relationship? Now, some obviously don't believe in God's providence. They're not interested in building a marriage based on God's providence, because what do? They run behind God, or they run ahead of God. Very few, when it comes to the marriage relationship, are working right alongside with God. Now, there are those who sometimes try to force marriage relationships. And usually those who try to force a relationship are going to get in trouble. And those who marry because they feel they've got to hurry and get married, time's running out, usually they're going to find that they're very, very unhappy. Now remember, whenever you go about selecting a mate and you consider that you want this marriage to be built on God's providence, not everybody can be married. Now, if a person never has been married, he has the right to marry somebody eligible to get married. And then we would also note in Matthew 19:9, the one who's guilty of adultery, fornication, what have you, is not free once put away to marry again. All right? And then if a person has been put away, or if indeed a person has put away a spouse based upon adultery, fornication, that person is free to marry again, to marry somebody eligible to marry. And then if your mate has died, then of course the marriage bond ends and that person is free to marry. There are also some practical considerations that you need to consider, not just that which is given by the law of God. There's some practical, wise suggestions that you need to keep in mind before you ever get married. For example, I warn young people, don't marry outside the church. That is, don't marry outside of Christ. Marry a Christian. Somebody says, well, I married a Christian, and that fella, he cheated on me, he was abusive toward me. Then somewhere along the way, that fellow stopped being a Christian, didn't he? When we say marry a Christian, we're talking about marry somebody who loves Christ, who honors Christ, and therefore will love his wife, love her husband, and honor that person selected. So don't marry out of the church. Marry a fellow Christian. Be mindful of finances. These are just some practical areas. Be mindful of finances. Somebody say, he's out of high school. He's not going to further his education. He's not really interested in going to learn any kind of trade. But here's what he's been doing since he's 15 years old, and so we'll just go ahead and get married and we'll live off love. Well, you're going to find that that won't pay the bills. And so sometimes we make bad decisions because we think it's all going to be rosy. It's all going to work out. But a lot of people divorce for what reason? Financially, they're not stable. Financially, they've made poor decisions. They have not worked long enough and hard enough to be able to take care of a family. And so sometimes financial reasons, some should not get married. Then there's the compatibility factor. Compatibility. You think, well, there are a lot of things about this guy, this girl I don't like, but over time he or she will change. Yeah, you see how that goes, all right? Whatever's bothering you before you get married will be multiplied once you're married, all right? So there's the compatibility issue. So there are some reasons some should not get married because God says don't get married. And there are likewise some practical reasons that people should consider before getting married. Now, I know that providence plays a key role in the marriage of Christians. Marriage made in heaven is built on providence. I recognize that when I got married, and I think other men and women would say the same thing, that we didn't understand all about marriage. Of course not. But when you are building that marriage on God's providence, trusting in Him, it means you're taking biblical principles and you're working toward making your home a success, and it will work out. How do you know if your marriage is going to be built on providence? You're trusting in God through your obedient faith, all right? A marriage that's made in heaven is a marriage that's built on providence. Abraham said to Eliezer, I want you to go to my homeland, and I'm trusting God that you'll come back with a wife for my son Isaac, all right? Built on providence. He'd seen God's providence displayed in the past. He believes in it, and he wants to see that demonstrated in the life of Isaac as well. Now, here's the second point to remember. A marriage built in heaven, or a marriage made in heaven, is not only built upon providence, but it's bonded by prayer. Don't ever leave out prayer as a pivotal part of a successful marriage. You remember Genesis 2:24, therefore shall a man leave his father and mother and shall cleave unto his wife. Now that word cleave carries with it the idea of permanence. It's like bonding glue, all right? Bonded together, cannot be separated or torn apart. It is till death us do part. Now, when you bow your head and pray, young person, I want to tell you, you pray for a future mate. And if you are dating, young lady, young man, you pray for him. You seek God's guidance. And once you get married, you regularly go to God in prayer for your spouse. Let your relationship be bonded by prayer. Notice the importance of prayer in Genesis chapter 24. First of all, in verse 7, we find that Abraham is praying unto God. And not only is he praying unto God, but Eliezer is praying unto God. Verse 7 begins with Abraham talking about the Lord God of heaven, which took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and which spake unto me and that sware unto me, saying, unto thy seed will I give this land. He shall send his angel before thee. Thou shalt take a wife unto my son from thence. Those are the words of a man who prays. He'd been praying about this. But not only do we find that Abraham is a great man of prayer and had been praying for his son, verse 12 says Eliezer's praying. Now he's concerned that he may not fulfill what his master desires. And so he brings God into all of this. So evidently Eliezer is a righteous man. And just like his master, he believes in the power of prayer. And he's seeking God's counsel. He's seeking God's guidance. As he goes to fulfill this task of his master, he says, God, I want you to interfere. I want you to lead me. So it's a marriage that's built on providence. It's a marriage that is bonded by prayer. And where do we see Isaac at the end of the chapter? When Eliezer returns with this woman Rebekah, we find, verse 63, that Isaac is out in the field meditating. He's in meditation. What's he doing? He's praying to God. And no doubt he's praying, asking God to bless every aspect of his life, including finding a mate. And so the point is this, dear friends, you can't live in rebellion and expect God to answer your prayers. If you really do want a faithful, loving, companion, husband, or wife, whatever it may be, then you've got to understand that's built on providence and it's bonded by prayer. So God wants what's best for you. Finding a wife, according to Proverbs 18:22, is a good thing. Now, to find a proper mate and to have a successful marriage is going to be bonded by prayer. I want to tell you, parents are praying. They sure are. Loving parents have spent a lot of years praying that you will find that one somewhere out there who will be the proper mate for their child. Rebekah, her family was a wonderful family. They were a people who were willing to let their daughter Rebekah to go and marry this man Isaac, the son of Abraham, because they too trusted in God. Look at verse 50. And you'll notice also how that Rebekah, she was a great woman of prayer. Laban and Bethuel answered and said, the thing proceedeth from the Lord. We cannot speak unto thee bad or good. Now remember, Laban is the brother of Rebekah. He feels in charge of Rebekah. Behold, Rebekah is before thee. Take her and go and let her be thy master's son's wife, as the Lord hath spoken. And it came to pass that when Abraham's servant heard their words, he worshipped the Lord, bowing himself to the earth. And the servant brought forth jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment and gave them to Rebekah. He gave also to her brother and to her mother precious things. They did eat and drink, he and the men that were with him, and tarried all night. And they rose up in the morning. He said, send me away unto my master. And her brother and her mother said, let the damsel abide with us a few days. See, they're having trouble cutting the apron strings, aren't they? You can take her with her, but we're not ready just yet. So he says, hinder me not, verse 56. Seeing the Lord hath prospered my way, send me away that I may go to my master. And they said, well, we'll call the damsel, inquire of her. And they called Rebekah and said unto her, wilt thou go with this man? And she said, I will go. Rebekah, you see, is someone who was building her marriage on providence. She was one who had it bonded by prayer. And so it is that if you want to have a marriage made in heaven, you'll build your marriage on providence and let it be bonded by prayer. Now, it's hard, isn't it, for family to let somebody go, be it a son or daughter, particularly a daughter. It was hard for this family to let Rebekah go, but they had to. I'll tell you, sometimes I'll stand before an audience of people, and right before me is a young man, a young woman, and right in the middle is that girl's daddy. And when I say, who giveth this woman in marriage, I believe that man could hate me at that very moment, right? I mean, he just has this look like he despises me for asking him that question. And so reluctantly, he lets his daughter go, and he presents her on behalf of his mother and himself. He presents her to her husband. And so this family has to let her go, because this is a family who believes in providence. They believe in prayer. Rebekah says, I'm going to go and I will marry this man. Now, a lot of people were praying in Genesis 24. We find Abraham a man of prayer, Eliezer a man of prayer, Isaac a man of prayer, Rebekah and her family praying people. This marriage is going to come about because it's right. And what I'm saying to you is, when it's right, you can know this. There have been parents praying for you. There have been friends praying for you. And I trust that you too, as you consider marriage, are praying over the one that you're going to marry. Now here's a third point. Marriage is not only built on providence, and not only is it bonded by prayer, it likewise is blessed by purity. Now there's an instruction manual. It's called the Bible, God's Word, and it is the best book that has been written concerning marriage. And if you want your marriage to be a blessing, and you want to be blessed by God, that means you pay careful instruction to what God teaches. Interesting statement is made about Rebekah in verse 16 of Genesis 24. She was a virgin. She was pure. She had kept herself for the moment of marriage. Now, particularly in the marriage relationship, one needs to remember the word purity. You say, well, I'm not married. I haven't been pure like I ought to be. Then determine to be. And commit yourself to keeping your marriage relationship pure as well. Look at verse 63, where the text says, Isaac went out to meditate in the field at the eventide. He lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, the camels were coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she lighted off the camel. For she had said unto the servant, what man is this that walketh in the field to meet us? And the servant had said, it is my master. Therefore she took a veil and covered herself. That was an act of purity on her part. In order to meet this man that's going to become my husband, That was a symbol of her modesty and her submission toward him. Now, so many young people are marred and scarred because they have not maintained purity before marriage. So many marriages end because the marriage relationship is not blessed by the purity of the husband and the wife in the relationship. And so here's a relationship of two people who came together that not only were trusting in God's providence, not only were praying to God that they might find one another, but thirdly, they'd kept themselves pure for each other. Now, don't ever overestimate your ability to resist temptation. Consider the priorities in life. What's most important? And what is most important is this marriage relationship and keeping that marriage relationship pure. The Bible says, flee fornication, keep yourself pure. Not because God is trying to keep intimacy away from any one of us, but rather because He wants to bring it to us in all of its beauty, in all of its purity, in all of its sacredness, and that is called marriage. That's the blessing that God wants to give us. Now, this couple would enter into the marriage relationship. Remember, the customs, the ceremonies are quite different. But verse 66 says, the servant told Isaac all things that he'd done. And Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Two women who mean so much to a young man. One will be his mother, first part of his life. And then how does he deal with the loss of a mother? Because he takes a wife. She becomes even more special than the mother. A godly mother will do what? She will train her boy to love his mate more than he loves mama. Because that's the significant relationship of all, that relationship between husband and wife. God says, I'm going to give little boys, little girls, I'm going to give them their mother. And then when they get older, I want them to enjoy the blessings of husband and wife, the greatest blessing of all. And so it is that God made marriage a priority. And oh, the beauty, oh, the tenderness of thinking that Isaac, in his sorrow over his mother, welcomes beautiful Rebekah into his life, into his mother's tent, and there she dwelt with him as his chosen wife. God bless them. God blesses all marriages that are built on providence, bonded by prayer, and blessed by purity. You don't have to get married to go to heaven. You don't have to get married to a man or to a woman, but you do have to marry Christ, don't you? And the beautiful, beautiful symbolic relationship of the husband and wife is the relationship Christ has with His church, Ephesians 5. And so this morning, I speak to all those who are here and ask this question, are you married to Christ? Jesus Christ is the bridegroom to the church, which is His precious bride. And to be saved, you've got to be a part of His bride. This morning, would you step out in trust of your Redeemer and be obedient to His message? As a penitent believer, will you confess Jesus, be baptized into Him? You need to be restored to a proper relationship with God. I'll tell you this. You want your marriage and all other relationships in your life to be right. It begins with your relationship to God. All right? So think about that. Respond as you need as together we stand and sing.